"I was told you needed a cook," she said. He opened the door and froze. The widow expected a stranger, not a woman with children. What he didn't know, he needed them more than they needed him. The sun had barely crested the ridge when Thomas Ray opened the cabin door, expecting silence, wind, maybe the scent of pine and ash lingering from the dying hearth fire. What he got instead was a figure standing in the clearing, wrapped in a long faded coat, dust clinging to her hem, and 2 children behind her, still as fence posts. His first instinct was to reach for the old shotgun that hung near the window, but he didn't. Something in the way she stood made him pause. She didn't flinch, didn't plead, just waited. And then she spoke. "I was told you needed a cook." Her voice was steady, not soft, not begging. It held a quiet certainty, like she wasn't offering help so much as confirming something he should already know. Thomas blinked, studying her. She looked maybe 30, but her eyes carried a weight that made her seem older. Dark hair pinned back simply, jaw tight. The 2 children clung to the back of her skirt-owned boy, 1 girl. The girl was older, perhaps 9, with sharp eyes like her mother's. The boy was younger, cheeks chapped raw from wind, nose red, hands buried in the coat sleeves. They didn't speak. Thomas didn't move. He hadn't had visitors in nearly 6 months, not since the snow had come down early and stayed longer than it was welcome. He didn't remember sending for a cook. But he remembered the letter Mr. Hahn had sent from the other side of the mountain, written in careful script. "There is someone who needs a place. You need more than you think. She will come." He hadn't answered. Still, here she was. He stepped back, not out of fear but uncertainty, not of her of himself. "I didn't ask for," he started, but stopped when the boy coughed, a harsh sound that cracked in the cold. The woman didn't flinch. She just looked past him, into the cabin, and then she said it again. "I was told you needed a cook." Thomas stood aside. The woman stepped forward, not hesitating, not asking. The children followed, the girl helping her brother with a quiet hand at his back. Inside, the cabin was plain own table, 1 chair, a narrow stove, and a cot pressed against the far wall. A second room was barely visible through a cracked door, and the hearth glowed weakly from the embers left overnight. It wasn't much, but it was warm. The boy's shoulders slumped in visible relief. Thomas still hadn't spoken when the woman set down the small pack she carried and unwrapped a cloth bundle: flour, lard, dried apples. She moved like someone used to work, not waiting for permission, just doing what needed doing. She lit the stove without asking where things were, found the kettle, measured the water. It shouldn't have felt like a kindness. It did. He finally cleared his throat. "What's your name?" "Malin." She didn't offer a last name. Thomas looked at the children. The girl met his gaze directly. "Her name's Sue," Malin said without looking up from the kettle. "He's June." "Are they?" He didn't finish the sentence. Malin's hands stilled just a second before she resumed. "Yes." It was the only answer he got, and for now, it was enough. By the time the sun had climbed higher, the scent of hot biscuits filled the room. Malin worked in silence, moving through the cabin like she'd always known its shape. June had fallen asleep in a corner, curled up with an old quilt Thomas didn't remember owning. Zhu watched everything in the room, her mother, Thomas with the sharp observation of someone who'd learned too early to keep track of exits. Thomas ate in silence. The biscuits were warm, flaky, real. He hadn't tasted food like this in a long time, not since Mary. He shoved that thought down. When the plates were cleared, Malin sat across from him at the table, her back straight, hands folded neatly in front of her. "I don't need charity," she said evenly. "I work. You have a roof. You have land. You can't do all of it yourself. You don't know what I can do." "No," she agreed, "but I know what you haven't done." Her eyes flicked toward the unplowed patch behind the barn. "And what you've let rot." He bristled, but not enough to argue. "I cook, I clean, I can mend, and I can teach them," she said, glancing toward the children. "We won't be a burden." Thomas stared at her. There was no plea in her voice, no desperation, just a firm, quiet offering. Not pity, not hope, just survival. He leaned back in his chair, letting silence settle between them again. He was good at silence. had lived in it for the better part of 2 years, since Mary's cough had become blood, and then quiet, and then the earth above her grave sank just slightly too low by winter's end. He hadn't asked for company, but company had come. "Suit yourself," he muttered finally, and rose from the table. Malin didn't smile. She didn't need to. That night, Thomas heard sounds he hadn't in months. The soft rustle of quilts being folded, the gentle rhythm of a lullaby sung in a language he didn't understand, the creak of footsteps across the boards as someone stoked the fire while he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. It shouldn't have comforted him. It did. The next morning he found Shu outside, hauling water from the pump with a determination that didn't match her small frame. He told her not to. She didn't stop. He offered to help. She didn't answer. So he let her be. Inside, Malin was already boiling rice porridge, cracking an egg into it with practiced precision. Jun sat at the table, hair still mussed from sleep, watching her with the wide, uncertain eyes of a boy who hadn't been warm enough in too long. As days passed, the cabin changed, not loudly, quietly, with the rhythm of hands that had done hard work before. Clothes got washed, tools were mended, the shelves were reorganized. Food stretched further than he thought it could, the fire was never low, and slowly, Thomas began to feel the absence of absence, the weight of it, how much he had ignored in his grief. Then came the evening the trail brought strangers. It was near dusk when the sound of hooves cracked the quiet. Not one rider, 3. Dust still fresh on their coats, guns visible, not drawn but not hidden. Thomas stood on the porch, arms crossed. Malin stood beside him, the children were inside. The man in front graying at the temples, face sharp with familiarity, and Arroganza nodded as he reined in. "Didn't think we'd find you this far out, Tom." Thomas didn't reply. "Not yet." The man tilted his head. "Heard you were looking to sell." "I'm not." "Well now, that ain't what I heard." The man's smile was wide, too white. "I heard a man who lost his wife ain't got much reason to keep a place like this running. Thought I'd save you the trouble." "You heard wrong." The man's eyes flicked to Malin. "New help?" Malin didn't blink, just stared. The man's smile twitched. "Different kind of help, I guess." Thomas's jaw tensed. "You've said what you came to say. Ride on." But the man didn't move. Not yet. His eyes lingered too long. His grin stayed too wide. Thomas's hand drifted toward the shotgun near the door. Finally, the man tipped his hat, mockingly polite. "Well, maybe next time." They rode off slowly, too slowly, leaving the dust to settle in the fading light. Inside, Shu was already packing their few belongings into bundles. "They'll come back," she said simply. Thomas didn't argue. Jun sat by the fire, holding one of the old wooden toys Mary had carved, his face unreadable. Thomas watched Malin stir the fire higher. She said nothing. For the first time in 2 years, Thomas felt something stir in his chest that wasn't just grief. It was fear. And something just beneath it, resolve. The next morning brought silence, the kind that didn't feel empty but heavy. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch with his coffee cooling in his hands, staring out across the field that stretched toward the tree line. The visitors from the night before were long gone, no doubt already stirring trouble in the next town, but their presence still clung to the earth like smoke after fire. He hadn't said anything to Malin that night, but she knew. She knew enough about men like that, the way they came smiling, asking questions that weren't really questions, pressing into places that weren't theirs to touch. And Thomas could see she'd already begun preparing. She didn't panic, she didn't cry, she adjusted. That frightened him more than if she'd wept. The children moved quietly through the morning routine. Shu was already outside hauling kindling, her face set in that stone-faced determination he'd come to expect from her. Jun stayed close to Malin, his small hands always touching something she wore, her coat, her sleeve, the hem of her dresses if she might vanish if he didn't. Thomas watched them, that tightness in his chest refusing to ease. He hadn't asked for them, but now that they were here, the thought of losing them, of seeing that wagon roll up again with more polite threats, was something he didn't know if he could stand. Later that day, as the sun moved slow behind the haze of thick clouds, he found himself walking the property, scanning for things he'd neglected. The fence along the north pasture was sagging, barely enough to keep wind out, let alone a man on horseback. The tool shed door hung crooked on its hinges, and the barn roof still leaked where the old cedar plank had split. He'd ignored it all for months. It hadn't mattered when it was just him. Now it did. By mid-afternoon, he was hammering the new plank in place. Mei Lin came to the barn with a cup of water and a roll of cloth tucked under her arm. She didn't speak at first, just watched him work from the shadow of the doorway. He noticed her hands were red from scrubbing. She didn't complain. "Why do they come here?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but direct. Thomas didn't look down. "Because I said no." "To what?" "Selling." She nodded slowly. "And you think they'll accept that?" "No." Mei Lin handed him the water. He drank without speaking. Then she reached up and handed him the cloth, which he took more hesitantly. She looked up at the patched hole he was fixing and said, "I've seen worse roofs." She didn't press him, didn't poke at the shame he felt for letting the place fall apart. She just stood there a moment longer before turning and leaving him with the hammer and the silence. That night, they didn't talk much. After supper, Xiu sat by the fire teaching Jun how to fold paper into birds using scraps from old seed catalogs she'd found in the cupboard. Jun's small fingers fumbled often, but his face lit up when the first bird took shape. He held it like it was made of glass, whispering something in Mandarin to it, before setting it on the table beside his bowl. Thomas sat across from them, pretending to read but not turning the pages. Every now and then, he glanced at the boy and the paper bird, and something in him twisted. He hadn't heard a child laugh in years. He stayed up late that night, after the fire burned low and Mei Lin had gone to bed with the children. He stood by the window, listening. Nothing moved out there, not yet. But he knew it was only a matter of time. The man with the too white smile would come back. That kind of man always did. 3 days passed, then 4. Mei Lin planted cabbage near the window. She said nothing about it, just dug her hands into the dirt and started working. Xiu helped, bringing water and pressing seeds into the earth like she'd done it 1,000 times. Jun collected rocks and lined them along the edge of the garden. When Thomas asked why, the boy just shrugged and said, "To protect it." He said it like it was obvious, like it worked. By the 6th day, they'd settled into a rhythm. Chores were shared. Meals were quiet, but full. The house no longer felt like a coffin with windows. Then the trail gave warning. It was a bird-first one of the blue-tailed jays that always scattered when riders approached. Thomas saw them bolt from the trees, slicing the sky in sharp angles. He dropped the pail of feed and ran for the porch, eyes scanning the path. Dust rose in the distance. Not much, but enough. He didn't wait this time. He went inside, found the shotgun, loaded it. Mei Lin saw him and didn't ask questions. She moved the children into the back room, whispering something in Mandarin that sounded like a prayer, but there was no fear in her voice, only steadiness. The riders came slow again, same number. This time, the lead man didn't smile. "Tom," he said, stopping near the fence line. "That woman, she yours?" Thomas said nothing. "She doesn't belong here." Thomas's jaw worked. "Neither do you." "You think I'm here for fun?" the man asked, glancing over his shoulder at his companions. "I'm here to do you a favor. You're clinging to this dead land like it owes you something. It doesn't. Sell the place. Take the money. No one has to get uncomfortable." Behind the front door, Mei Lin stood with a knife, hidden from view but ready. Thomas's voice was like gravel. "You come on my land again, I won't just be uncomfortable, I'll be unkind." The man grinned, the way a man does when he thinks he's in control. "This isn't over, Tom." "Never thought it was." They rode off again. That night, Thomas sat outside alone for a long time. Mei Lin joined him eventually, not asking, not talking. They watched the stars come out one by one. "Why did you really come here?" he asked finally. Mei Lin looked up at the sky. "Because he said it was safe." "Who?" "Han." Thomas nodded slowly. That old man always had a way of seeing things others didn't. "He also said I'd be needed more than wanted." Thomas looked at her then. He wasn't wrong. She turned to him, her eyes soft now, but sometimes needed turns into something else. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. Over the next week, everything changed. Not fast, slowly. The land began to breathe again. Thomas found himself waking up before the sun with purpose, not just because the dreams wouldn't let him sleep. Malin cooked meals that warmed more than just the belly. The children laughed more often, and the house no longer echoed like a tomb. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. Folded into the side of the chicken coop, tied with a thin red ribbon, the parchment was clean, written in perfect script. You have 10 days. After that, we return. Sell or leave. No second chances. There was no signature. Thomas read it 3 times. Malin read it once. Then she tucked it into the stove and watched it burn. That afternoon, Thomas began reinforcing the porch posts. He built a second fence line around the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was a signal. Malin didn't say anything, but the next morning she sharpened the kitchen knives and placed them in a neat line on the shelf closest to the stove. They didn't talk about it, they just prepared. On the 6th night, June woke up screaming, not crying screaming, like something had crawled out of the dark and clutched his lungs. Malin ran to him, held him close, whispering soothing words as he trembled. Shu stood in the doorway, silent but wide-eyed. Thomas stood behind them all, frozen. Malin looked up at him. He dreams of fire. Thomas nodded. So do I. June's cries softened. He fell back asleep in his mother's arms, still twitching. Malin laid him down, then sat by the hearth until dawn. The threat of violence hung heavier than ever now. Not just the riders, something deeper, something that reminded Thomas of loss, of the kind of destruction that didn't always come with guns. The night before the 10th day, Malin found Thomas at the barn. He was oiling the rifle he hadn't touched in years. His hands shook just a little. Do you think we'll make it? She asked. He didn't look up. Don't know. But you're staying? He nodded. Then so are we. She turned and he reached out, grabbing her wrist gently. If they come, if they take this place, take the kids, get out, don't wait for me. Malin stared at him for a long moment. No. It was the only word she said. Then she walked back to the house, leaving Thomas in the dark with his rifle and the echo of her defiance. The next morning dawned cold and dry. The 10th day. The 10th day came without ceremony, without sound. Just a slow burn of grey light stretching across the frostbitten hills, as if the world held its breath. Thomas Ray was already awake when the first pale threads of dawn crept into the cabin. He hadn't slept, hadn't even closed his eyes. The fire had burned low hours ago, but he hadn't bothered to feed it. Cold settled around him like an old coat. He sat in the same spot by the window, shotgun across his knees, rifle propped against the wall. He had cleaned and loaded both 3 times through the night, just for something to do, something to keep the ghosts at bay. Malin didn't say a word when she entered the room. She moved quietly, setting a kettle on the stove, tightening the shawl over her shoulders. Her face was unreadably neither calm nor afraid, just steady, like the stones that lined the creek bed behind the barn. She didn't ask if he thought they were coming. She didn't have to. Shu came out next, wrapped in one of the thick quilts from Mary's old trunk. She didn't speak either. She just sat beside the stove and began folding strips of fabric into small pouches. June was still asleep, curled in the far corner beneath the window, his paper bird tucked under his chin. The world outside remained still, but every moment stretched taut like wire. Thomas finally spoke when the kettle began to hiss. You don't have to stay. Malin didn't answer right away. She poured the water into 2 tin cups, handed one to him, and sat across the table. We're already here, she said. Leaving doesn't change that. He took the cup, let the steam warm his hands. They'll have guns. So will you. It won't be enough. Malin looked at him, eyes clear. Then we make it cost them. It wasn't rage in her voice. It wasn't vengeance. It was something deeper, older. The voice of someone who had lost more than they could ever get back and yet kept going. Not out of hope, but out of stubbornness. Out of the bone-deep understanding that life was already taken once. It would not be taken again without a fight. By midday, they had prepared all they could. Thomas placed extra ammunition on the windowsills, positioned the ladder from the loft so it could be pulled up quickly. The second room, where the children slept, was now fortified with planks over the windows and a barrel of water in case the worst came. Malin had even ground pepper into small satchels, a trick she said her grandmother used when thieves raided their village in the north. "Blind a man," she'd whispered, tying each one tightly. "Even if only for seconds, sometimes that's all you need." Xiu practiced with a slingshot out back, not for fun, with purpose, sharp stones and steel nuts lined up in neat rows. She didn't ask for instruction, she just shot and shot again until her fingers blistered. Thomas tried not to watch her too long. The sight of a child preparing for battle was a kind of heartbreak he couldn't put words to. The waiting was the worst. Not the fear, not the uncertainty, but the stillness. The feeling that at any moment everything would change and there would be no undoing it. When the sun began to dip low, coloring the sky with blood-tinged hues, Thomas stood on the porch, rifle in hand. The air was bitter, and his breath fogged with every exhale. Malin joined him, her coat pulled tight, her hair braided and tucked beneath a worn scarf. "Maybe they won't come," he said, though he didn't believe it. "Maybe," she echoed. But then came the sound. Distant, rhythmic, horses. Not fast, not rushing, confident, like men who thought they'd already won. They came out of the trees the same way they had before, 3 of them, riding easy, rifles strapped to their backs, pistols on their hips. The lead man smiled as he saw the cabin. He didn't get down. "Evening," he called. "Looks like we're right on time." Thomas stepped forward, not off the porch, but enough that his silhouette stood tall in the fading light. "Turn around." The man chuckled. "Now, that ain't hospitable, not after all the effort we made to get out here." "You made a mistake," Thomas said, coming back. The man's smile faded just a bit. "You threatening me, Tom? I'm telling you, this land is mine, this house is mine, these people are under my roof. That's the last warning you get." The man finally dismounted. His boots crunched over frost as he stepped closer. The other 2 stayed mounted but moved slightly apart, flanking, measuring the cabin's weak points. "You know what I think, Tom?" he said, walking slow. "I think you've lost your mind. Living out here with ghosts, now you've found yourself a woman and some kids, you think that gives you purpose again? It don't. You're still broken, still alone." "I'm not alone." That made the man pause. Thomas raised the rifle slowly, calmly. Behind him, Malin moved inside the doorway, out of sight. The man sighed. "You know how this ends." Thomas didn't blink. "Not for you." What happened next was a blur. The man reached for his pistol. Thomas fired first. The shot tore through the silence, cracking like thunder. The man dropped instantly, face twisted not in pain, but in surprise. The 2 riders jerked their reins, one firing wildly toward the house. A second shot rang out, Malin's from the side window. The shooter's horse reared, and he tumbled backward into the dirt. The last man didn't fire. He turned his horse and bolted, disappearing back into the trees as fast as he'd come. Smoke drifted from the rifle barrel as Thomas stood frozen, chest heaving. Malin stepped onto the porch, her face pale but focused. She held the pistol steady, hands trembling only slightly. Inside, John screamed. Xiu ran to him. Thomas didn't move for a long time. The man in the dirt groaned, clutching his side. The bullet hadn't killed him, not yet. He rolled slightly, coughing. Malin looked at Thomas. "We have to make a choice." Thomas nodded. He stepped down from the porch, boots crunching frost, and stood over the man. His face was pale now, blood pooling beneath him. "You've still got time," Thomas said. "Use it to crawl out of here and never come back." The man tried to spit but didn't have the strength. "You're lucky," Thomas added. "My Mercy didn't die with my wife." And then he walked away. The man didn't move. By nightfall, the bodies had been dragged to the edge of the woods. Thomas didn't bury them. He left them where the wolves could decide what kind of men they were. The children never asked about it. But the look in Xiu's eyes changed after that. She still watched everything, still memorized the weight of the world, but now she watched it with the knowledge that it could be bent. That wrong could be pushed back. That night, the fire burned hot. Malin sat at the table with Jun in her lap. He was quiet, staring at the paper bird in his hands. Xiu sat near the hearth, polishing stones without speaking. Thomas watched them all, something heavy rising in his throat. He wanted to say thank you. He didn't. Instead, he sat beside Jun and took the bird gently from his hands. He held it a moment, studying the small creases, the way it had been folded with care and hope. "I'll keep it safe," he said. Jun didn't answer, but he smiled. The wind shifted in the days that followed, not just in the trees or along the fence line, but in the house itself. There was no celebration, no moment where they laughed or leaned back in chairs and said, "We did it." It wasn't like that. What happened out there by the porch had settled in everyone like a stone dropped into water, sinking, deep and heavy. The threat was gone, yes, but safety didn't return. Not right away. In the quiet that came after the smoke, survival had left its fingerprints. Maylin worked harder, though Thomas didn't know how that was possible. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, tended the small cabbage sprouts with a sharpness that had nothing to do with vegetables. Her hands were red and raw by midday, her hair always tied up, her sleeves always rolled. She didn't rest. She moved like someone trying to outrun something that couldn't be seen. Thomas noticed. So did Shu. The girl had stopped asking questions. Where once she would follow Maylin around the cabin, helping or watching, she now sat alone, carving letters into bits of firewood with a small rusted nail she'd found behind the barn. She never showed anyone what she carved. She kept them stacked beneath the window like tiny messages she didn't dare speak aloud. Jun began waking in the middle of the night, not screaming this time, but gasping like he'd been pulled from water. Maylin would rise each time, whispering to him in their shared tongue, holding him against her chest until his breathing slowed. And Tomasha sat at the table those nights, pretending not to listen, pretending the ache in his chest was just age. On the fifth night after the shooting, Thomas found himself outside beneath the stars. The air was sharp and still, the kind of cold that snapped twigs beneath your boots and tightened the skin around your knuckles. He carried a lantern, the light weak against the dark, and made his way to the far fence line where Mary was buried. He hadn't visited in months. Her grave was marked only by a small wooden cross and a pile of stones he'd arranged 1 week after the soil stopped sinking. No flowers, no words carved into marble, just what he could do with his hands. That used to feel like enough. Now, looking at the dirt and the tilt of the cross, he realized how much he'd let even this fall apart. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "I thought I was done. Thought when you left, there wasn't anything left worth saving. But now there's these kids, this woman, and I'm scared, Mary. Scared because they remind me what it felt like to have a home, and I don't know if I can survive losing it again." The wind didn't answer. He stayed there a while, long enough for the lantern to flicker low. When he returned to the house, Maylin was awake. She sat by the fire, stitching something one of Jun's sleeves, torn from where he'd snagged it on the fence that morning. She didn't look up. "I thought maybe you'd gone." Thomas shook his head, setting the lantern on the table. "I buried her out there. Before winter, she was the only thing I had left." Maylin said nothing, but her hands slowed. "I didn't ask for you to come here," he added, his voice lower now. "Didn't think I wanted anyone, but now—" He let the words trail off. Still, Maylin didn't speak. But after a moment, she set the needle aside, stood, and crossed the room. She didn't touch him, didn't offer comfort, just stood beside him. That was enough. The next morning, Jun didn't wake up crying. Instead, he rose early, helped Thomas bring in firewood, and sat on the porch eating his porridge without fuss. Something had shifted in the boy too, like some invisible thread had tightened in his chest, and now held him upright. Shu had taken to walking the perimeter of the cabin with a small length of rope and a notched stick, counting something only she understood. When Thomas asked her what she was doing, she just said, "Making sure we're still here." Later that day, a traveler came through. He wasn't a threat. Old, slow-moving, with a mule and a sack of letters, said he was heading west, chasing family that might have died 3 years back. He'd taken to stopping at cabins and outposts to pass news and offer what he could in trade. Thomas didn't want anything. Maylin asked if he had salt. He did. She gave him 2 apples and a scrap of cloth she'd embroidered with cranes. The man took it like it was gold. Before he left, he handed Thomas a letter. "Name's not on it," he said, "but the man who gave it to me said it belonged to someone who knows what it feels like to lose too much, and not enough at the same time." Thomas turned the envelope in his hands. It was unsealed. Later, By lamplight, he opened it. The handwriting was cramped, but neat. If you're reading this, it means she found you. Maybe not by name, maybe not by reason, but by need. She's not just a cook, not just a mother, she's something else. And you, friend, you're not just a man with a broken roof, you're the last place left that knows what it means to protect something without asking why. Keep her safe, keep the kids safe. And remember, family isn't built by blood, it's built by fire. There was no signature. Thomas folded the letter and placed it in the Bible on the shelf. That night, he told Malin about it, about the words. She didn't cry, but she did sit beside him longer than usual. When the fire began to fade, she leaned her head against his shoulder. It was the first time she'd touched him without purpose. The days that followed moved slowly. The ground began to soften. The cabbage plants grew. Jun stopped asking if they would have to leave. Xiu began teaching him to read using the labels on old canned goods and the spine of Thomas's tattered books. She made a game of it. He liked the way she smiled when he got a word right. Then came the fever. It started with Jun. A cough, then heat. His skin turned red, his eyes glassy. Malin didn't panic, but her hands worked fast boiling water, steeping herbs, folding damp cloths. She never left his side. Xiao refused to leave the room. She sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, watching every breath her brother took. Thomas brought wood, kept the fire going, fetched water in the dark. He didn't ask what more he could do. He just did what he could. 2 days passed. The fever didn't break. On the third night, Jun stopped speaking. His breath came in shallow pulls. Malin pressed her forehead to his and whispered something Thomas couldn't hear. Her voice cracked. He stood in the doorway, useless. Then he walked out into the cold. He didn't know where he was going, maybe to the fence line, maybe to Mary's grave, but he didn't make it that far. He dropped to his knees by the well and looked up at the sky. "I know I haven't spoken to you in a long time," he whispered. "And maybe I don't deserve to ask for anything, but that boy, he didn't do anything wrong. He's just a kid, please. If you're still out there, don't take him." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. When he returned to the cabin, the fire was low, the room quiet. Malin sat with Jun in her arms, her eyes red, face pale. She looked up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked afraid. "He's slipping," she said. Thomas knelt beside them. He touched Jun's forehead. It burned. But just then Jun stirred. His fingers twitched, his mouth moved. "Bird," he mumbled. Malin leaned closer. "What did you say?" Jun opened his eyes. Just a crack. "Paper bird, it's flying." He smiled. Malin wept. So did Thomas. The fever broke before dawn. Dawn came quietly, as if it too had held its breath through the night. Outside, the air had softened, the frost now melting into the edges of the earth where the sun touched. The trees no longer creaked with the burden of cold, and the cabin old as it was stood against the wind like it had been made for more than one life at a time. Jun slept without fever for the first time in 4 nights. His breaths, though shallow, were steady, and Malin refused to leave his side, sitting upright with her back against the bedpost, her hand resting gently on his chest, like her touch alone could anchor him to the world. Xiu had fallen asleep in the corner, her arms still wrapped around her knees, but now her chin rested there too, and her eyes blinked open just before the light slipped in through the cracks in the shutters. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her gaze found Malin's, and for a long moment, nothing else existed between them but the look. Then Malin nodded, a single, small gesture. But it was enough, the kind that said, "He's still with us." Thomas watched from the table, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He'd been up for hours, hadn't closed his eyes since the boy muttered about the paper bird. That phrase haunted him not in a frightening way, but in a way that felt like something forgotten being remembered. He didn't know what it meant to Jun, not really, but it made something inside Thomas ache. Because that's how fragile it all was now, a paper bird in a storm. By mid-morning, Malin let Thomas sit with Jun while she went outside to fetch fresh water. She moved slowly, not from exhaustion though she was clearly tired, but like someone who couldn't quite believe that the earth was still solid beneath her feet. As she stepped onto the porch, The sound of birdsong touched the air for the first time in weeks. It made her stop and close her eyes, just for a moment, just to feel it. Behind the house, the well creaked as she dropped the bucket, the rope smooth in her hands, her fingers raw and blistered but steady. When she pulled the bucket back up, she noticed a figure leaning against the fence near the tree line. She froze. The bucket swayed slightly. The man didn't move. He wasn't dressed like a traveler. His coat was too fine, his boots too clean, and he stood with a kind of stillness that set her teeth on edge, not like someone resting, but like someone watching. She said nothing, didn't shout for Thomas, just took the bucket, turned, and walked back inside. Thomas noticed her face the moment she returned, the stillness, the narrowing of her eyes. He stood up before she even set the bucket down. "Someone's out there," she said quietly. "Near the fence, just standing." Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rifle by the door, checked the chamber, and stepped onto the porch. The man was still there, leaning against the post like he'd been invited to wait. When he saw Thomas, he smiled. "You the one with the kids?" the man called. His voice was smooth, empty of heat. Thomas said nothing. "I was told you might need help," the man continued. "Figured I'd come offer it." Thomas raised the rifle, barrel steady. "We're not hiring." The man chuckled. "That's not what I heard." Behind Thomas, Malin stepped into the doorway. Her presence changed the air, hardened it somehow. The man's eyes flicked to her, and his smile faltered. "I see," he said. "She's already here." Malin stepped forward. "Who sent you?" The man tilted his head. "Funny thing, the one who gave me the name didn't leave his own, just said you might be in need. But looking at you now," he glanced toward the house. "Seems like you're managing just fine." Thomas lowered the rifle only an inch. "You come here for something?" "I came here for a look." The man's tone changed slightly. "But maybe I ought to keep moving. Seems like you've got it all sorted." Thomas said nothing, and after a moment, the man nodded. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked back toward the trees, disappearing as quietly as he'd come. Malin watched until he was gone. "Who was that?" Thomas asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, a reminder. Of what? That not all ghosts are dead. For the rest of the day, they said little to one another. The tension hung between them like smoke that refused to clear. Jun slept. Xiu read aloud from a battered old storybook she'd found behind the woodbox, her voice soft and uncertain at first, then stronger. She didn't read to anyone in particular, just let the words fill the cabin. It helped. That night, Thomas sat by the fire, flipping the letter over in his hands again, the one that had no name, the one that had described Mylin with a kind of quiet reverence that still unsettled him. He reread the final line. "Family isn't built by blood, it's built by fire." He looked at the hearth. The flames were low. In the morning, he asked Malin if she would come with him to town. It was unexpected. She hesitated. "Why?" "I need supplies. You'd know what the kids need better than I do. Besides," he paused, "I think it's time folks saw you." She didn't reply right away, but then she nodded. "I'll come." They left Xiu in charge of June only for a few hours and made the slow wagon ride into the settlement. It wasn't far, but it felt like another country. The closer they came to town, the more stiff Mylin sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze locked straight ahead. When they arrived, people stared. Not with cruelty, not all of them, anyway, but with curiosity, with surprise. Thomas walked beside her, not ahead. He tipped his hat at the general store, nodded at the man behind the counter. Malin followed him inside. "What can I do for you, Thomas?" the shopkeeper asked. "Need flour, salt, some oil if you've got it." The man looked past Thomas at Malin, then back again. "That all?" "And cloth, something strong." The shopkeeper nodded, turning to fetch the items. When he returned, he handed the cloth directly to Malin. She took it without speaking. On the way out, a woman near the edge of the street called out, "You the one staying with Thomas?" Malin stopped, nodded. The woman approached. She was older. Her dress plain but clean, her face weathered by wind and sun. "My boy saw you with those little ones," she said. "Said the girl reads better than most men twice her age. That true?" Malin nodded again. The woman smiled. "Good. About time someone around here taught 'em right." Then she turned and walked away. Malin said nothing the whole ride home, but Thomas saw her hands ease in her lap. Back at the cabin, June was sitting up in bed, color returned to his cheeks. Zhu had made soup watery, but warm and the smell filled the cabin. That night, they ate together at the table. For the first time since Malin had arrived, they all sat in the same place, shared the same bread, and listened to Zhu tell a story she half invented as she went along. There was laughter, not loud, not long, but real. When the children were asleep, Thomas stood on the porch while Malin washed dishes by lantern light. He didn't look back when he spoke. "That man who came to the fence, he said someone sent him, someone who knew you'd be here. You ever figure out who?" Malin's voice came through the open door. "Does it matter?" Thomas nodded. "Maybe not." Silence stretched. Then she said, "Before I left the rail camp, a woman handed me a parcel. No name, just said I'd know when it was time to open it." "You ever open it?" "Not yet." He turned and looked at her. Her sleeves were wet, her eyes tired, but she stood straighter than he remembered. "You think it's time now?" She paused. Then she dried her hands, walked to the corner where she kept her few belongings, and pulled out the parcel. It was wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a string. Together, they sat by the fire and opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded, black and white. It showed a small house, 3 children standing on the porch, and a man in the foreground wearing a wide-brimmed hat. On the back was a single sentence. "She carried hope like others carried sorrow close to the chest, too heavy to name." There was also a book, bound in leather, no title. Malin opened it slowly. The pages were filled with writing, not stories, but records, names, places, dates. A ledger of people who had taken in others, refugees, orphans, survivors. At the bottom of one page was Thomas's name. She looked up. He blinked. "I didn't write that." "No," she said, "but someone did." They sat there, the two of them, in silence. The fire crackled. The night wind slipped through the trees. And somewhere behind them, Jun murmured in his sleep. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, not easy, not seamless, but real, the kind of rhythm forged in fire and grit, the sort that doesn't ask permission from grief or pause for memory. It simply continues. Morning came with the scent of boiled cornmeal and the quiet shuffle of children's feet on rough wood floors. Noon brought chores water to haul, wood to chop, a roof to patch. And by nightfall, when the sun bent low behind the pines and the cabin sank back into shadow, it was the sound of Shu humming softly as she folded laundry and Jun laying still. His thin arms curled around the pillow like he could hold on to sleep with both hands. Thomas fixed the fence. Malin tended the garden that had mostly failed in spring but still yielded a stubborn patch of beans. The weather turned wet, then dry, and wet again. The earth breathed and groaned, but the house stood. The wind beat at it like a test, and each time the cabin held, Thomas felt something loosen inside some knot that had been there since before she arrived. He still didn't know what she had run from, not completely, but he was starting to see what she was running toward. What none of them knew was that the man who had come to the fence hadn't gone far. He had lingered in the trees for nearly 2 full days after leaving, watching the way the cabin pulsed with new life. He wasn't alone. There were other Stuo men who camped beyond the ridge and waited for his signal. They weren't lawmen. They weren't farmers. And they didn't ask questions about why a Chinese woman was living with a widow and 2 children. They were after something else, something older than vengeance, something colder than greed. Back at the cabin, Malin lit a candle on the table. She had begun teaching Shil how to read her own language, the ink-stroked symbols flowing across a thin sheet of paper like river reeds in wind. Shu took to it with the same intensity she showed in everything. She asked few questions but remembered everything. "What does this one mean again?" Shu pointed. Malin leaned over. "It means heart." "Like the kind in your chest?" Malin smiled. "Yes, but also like home, and sorrow, and strength. All that in one word? In one symbol." Shu nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the shape with reverence. Thomas watched from across the room. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, but his gaze settled on the page, the ink, the girl, and the woman. He felt the tug of it all, the quiet power of what was being passed from one soul to another, wordless and strong, stronger than anything he remembered from before. But the quiet didn't last. It never did. That night, as they were sitting down to a meal of stew and leftover bread, the first sound came. A sharp crack in the distance. Not thunder, not an animal. It was the unmistakable pop of a gunshot. Far off, but not far enough. Thomas stood. Malin froze. Zhu clutched Jun's arm. Then came another shot. Closer. Thomas went to the door, opened it slow. The sky was darkening fast, the last of the light slipping beneath the hills like it was running from something. "What is it?" Malin asked, her voice calm, even. "I don't know, but it's coming this way." He turned back inside, reached for the rifle, checked the chamber, loaded the second. Then he looked at Malin and handed her the pistol from the drawer. She didn't hesitate. "You know how to use it?" "I know how to defend my children," she said. That answer was good enough. He turned to Shu. "Take your brother, go upstairs, don't come down until I tell you. Understand?" Shu's eyes were wide, but she nodded. She grabbed Jun's hand and pulled him toward the stairs without a word. Jun glanced back at Malin once, but she didn't meet his eyes. She was already watching the door. Thomas moved to the window, peered out. Nothing but shadows. The tree line looked the same, but something in it felt wrong, as though the woods were holding their breath. Then came a voice. "Thomas Avery." It cut through the night, like a blade. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready. "I hear you. You got something of mine." The voice was smooth. Too smooth. It didn't carry anger, just certainty. "You'll have to be more specific." "I ain't playing, Thomas. The woman, she's mine." That changed something in him, in his grip, in his stance, not because of what the man said, but because of how he said it. Like Malin was a thing, like she could be possessed. Thomas didn't look back, but he knew she was standing behind him. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, "but there's no one here by that name. Just a woman raising 2 kids in peace. That's not yours. That's not anyone's." There was silence. Then, "You've been lied to." "I've been saved." Another pause. "You've got one chance to send her out. After that, what happens is on you." Thomas didn't flinch. "You best go back the way you came." He stepped off the porch. And that's when the first bullet came. It missed just barely, thudding into the post behind him. He rolled behind the wagon, took cover, and returned fire. The crack of his rifle echoed across the clearing, followed by a grunt, then silence. From inside, Malin called out, "2 more in the trees, left side." She had the window open just enough to see. Thomas adjusted, fired again, watching the muzzle flash light up the woods like fireflies. He heard a scream. Then nothing. But he knew it wasn't over. Inside, Malin grabbed the children's coats, wrapped them tight, and whispered something to Shu in a language the girl couldn't understand, but the tone was clear. Protect him, no matter what. Upstairs, Jun clutched Shu's hand. "Are we going to die?" he asked. Shu didn't answer. Outside, the last man stepped into the open. It was the one from the fence, his coat no longer clean, his face no longer smiling. "You don't know what she did," he said. Thomas stood, rifle aimed. "Don't care." "She burned it all, ran from the fire, left people behind. She saved 2 children, and she built a life out of the ashes. She's got blood on her hands." Thomas didn't lower the rifle. "So do I." The man took another step forward. That's when Malin appeared beside Thomas. She had the pistol in both hands. "You want to tell him?" she asked. "Or should I?" The man's eyes flicked between them. "You think he'd stay if he knew?" "I think he already knows," she said. She fired. The man crumpled. And it was over. Not with a scream, not with a battle. Just one shot, clean and final. Later, as they buried the bodies on the far end of the property, Thomas asked, "Is it true, what he said?" Malin didn't answer right away. She dropped the last shovelful of dirt and wiped her brow. "Back at the camp," she said, "we were starving. They blamed me for stealing rice, said I brought shame. I hadn't, but shame doesn't care about truth. They locked me in the kitchen and set it on fire. Thomas stared at her. I got out, she continued. Some didn't. I've lived with that every day since. He didn't speak, didn't ask more. That night, she laid the pistol back in the drawer and sat by the fire. The children slept upstairs. Thomas brought in more wood, and for a long time, the only sound was the wind at the windows. Finally, she said, Do you still want me to stay? Thomas looked at her, then at the stairs. This is your home, he said. It was the moment you knocked. She blinked. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, just a breath, just a sound. And in that silence, something new began. The seasons did not ask permission. They rolled forward in their quiet cruelty, snow bleeding into thaw, thaw giving way to wind-blown spring, and by the time the first wildflowers dared to sprout from the hard ground near the base of the well, life had already changed inside the walls of the cabin. What had been a place of survival had become something closer to a home, not through comfort or predictability, but through the slow accumulation of shared burdens, of moments passed without breaking. The firewood was stacked neater now, the garden rose straighter, Shu's hair had grown longer, and she'd learned to tie it back with a ribbon Mylin made from scraps of cloth that once lined the bottom of the pantry. Jun still dreamed too loudly, kicking in his sleep, mumbling in a half-language he barely remembered, and Thomas, though he never said it aloud, had stopped pacing the porch at night. The rifle still sat behind the door, always loaded, but his hand no longer hovered near it after sundown. He had begun sleeping through the night again. Not because he felt safe, but because he knew if danger came, he wouldn't be the only one standing. Maylin spent more time outside. She wasn't afraid of the woods now. She walked the edge of the property every few days, picking wild onions or gathering berries when the vines began to bloom. One morning she found the remnants of a small fire beyond the ridge-charred sticks, a smouldering piece of cloth, a broken cup. She said nothing to Thomas when she returned. She simply washed her hands and made breakfast as usual, placing bowls of porridge before the children like always. But there was a stillness behind her eyes, he noticed. They didn't speak of what happened that night, the shooting, the man who called her out, the blood in the soil. It had settled over them like the ash from an old fire ever present, but no longer choking. What they did talk about was smaller, tangible, the crops, the chickens, the smokehouse they were building by hand, board by stubborn board. Sometimes, in the soft hours of late afternoon, Thomas found himself listening to Maylin tell stories not of her past, but of fables and parables, little tales she'd half forgotten from her mother's tongue, now passed on to Jun and Shu as they helped peel vegetables or fetch water. He didn't always understand the words, but he understood the rhythm, the care, the love buried in the telling. It was one of those soft afternoons when the letter came. A rider appeared just after midday, dust-covered and unsmiling. He didn't dismount, just handed Thomas the envelope, nodded once, and turned back down the trail without a word. Thomas stood for a long time at the edge of the porch, watching the man disappear into the haze. Then he looked down at the paper in his hand. There was no name, just a seal he recognized but hadn't seen in years. When he opened it, the words struck like stones. Brief, cold. Your presence is required at the magistrate's hearing. Regarding Maylin, known fugitive. Charges include desertion, arson, and culpable homicide. Surrender voluntarily within 6 days. He read it twice, then folded it slowly, and stepped inside. Maylin was stirring soup at the stove. She turned when she saw his face. What is it? He didn't speak, just held the letter out. She read it once, then again. Her fingers trembled slightly. They found me, she whispered. Thomas nodded. Jun and Shu were outside, chasing chickens, laughing. What does this mean? She asked, voice quiet. It means we don't have much time. She lowered the letter. I didn't think they'd come this far. They wouldn't have, not unless someone pushed them. Her eyes flicked up. The man? Thomas nodded again. Maylin looked away, her shoulders curled in, as if she were shrinking into herself. I didn't set the fire, not like they said. I didn't leave anyone behind. I tried to help. But when it got bad, when they locked me in that kitchen, I broke the window. I got out. I screamed for the others, but the flames, she swallowed, they wouldn't hear. I believe you. That doesn't matter to them. It matters to me. She set the letter on the table, like it might burn her. What will they do if I go? They'll sentence you, try you, or worse, pretend to. And if I don't? Thomas looked toward the children's laughter. Then they'll come. It rained that night, the kind of rain that slapped the roof like it had something to prove. Thunder rolled through the valley, long and slow, like it was dragging something heavy behind it. Malin sat by the fire, staring into the coals. Thomas paced. Xiu and Jun were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing the only proof that childhood had not yet been stolen entirely. We could run, Malin said suddenly. Thomas stopped. Where? South. Over the range. There's a settlement near the river. They don't ask questions there. It wouldn't hold. They'd follow. Then I turned myself in. No. Then what? Her voice broke slightly. What's left? He looked at her. We stand. She shook her head. They'll hang me. I won't let them. You can't stop the law. Thomas knelt by her. Maybe not, but I can show them the truth. Malin searched his face. And if that's not enough? He reached for her hand. Then I'll lie. It was not courage, what they felt. Not bravery. It was something deeper. A quiet decision to stop running. To face what was coming, even if it cost everything. The next day, they rode. Thomas left Xiu and Jun with an old friend in Tona Preacher's widow who'd taken in orphans before and had hands as strong as her prayers. Xiu didn't cry. Jun clung to Malin's leg, but she whispered something to him in their shared tongue, and he let go. The woman handed Malin a shawl and touched her shoulder. I don't know what you've done, she said, but I see who you are now. That's what I'll tell them. They rode in silence for hours, the hills giving way to flat land, then dust, then the faded outline of the magistrate's hall rising from the horizon like a scar. There were no banners, no welcome. Just a building with locked doors and armed men at the gate. When they arrived, Malin dismounted first. I'll go in alone, she said. Thomas shook his head. Not a chance. You'll be safer if... Not a chance. He followed her up the steps. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink and the slow decay of forgotten justice. A clerk took their names. A bailiff watched with arms folded. They were shown to a room, windowless, bare. And then the magistrate came. He was not cruel, not on the surface, just tired. Tired of paperwork and stories, and people who asked to be believed. He sat behind the desk and opened a file. You are Malin? I am. You understand the charges? I do. He looked up at her. Then at Thomas. You are her? Witness, Thomas said. Landowner, protector. The magistrate arched a brow. Protector? I'm the one she saved, Thomas said. The magistrate leafed through the pages. It says here she fled a fire, that she was seen escaping while others perished. She was locked in, Thomas said. She escaped through a window. She screamed for help. Who told you this? She did. And you believe her? Yes. The magistrate closed the file. That's not how justice works. No, Thomas said. That's how truth works. Silence fell. Then Malin stepped forward. I'll sign whatever confession you want, she said. If it means the children stay safe. If it means no one comes to that house again. The magistrate looked at her. Something in his expression softened. A fraction. I don't need a confession, he said. I need a reason. Thomas spoke before she could. Then here's mine. She made a home. She raised 2 children who weren't hers. She faced down men with guns. She never ran from us. So I'm asking you, don't make us run again. The magistrate leaned back. After a long pause, he closed the file. No trial, he said. No verdict. But you'll stay under observation. No leaving the territory. No contact with the old camp. Malin's breath caught. Thomas said, done. As they left the hall, Malin turned to him. You lied for me. No, he said. I spoke the truth they wouldn't listen to. They rode back in silence. But it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something mending. Of something once broken now beginning to heal. The children ran to them when they returned. Jun threw his arms around her. Xiu didn't cry, but her hand found Malin's and didn't let go. That night, as they sat around the table 4 bowls, 1 candle, The fire crackling behind them, Thomas raised a toast with a tin cup of water. "To cooks," he said. Malin smiled. And for the first time since she'd knocked on his door, her smile reached her eyes. The last snow came late that year, a quiet dusting that coated the cabin roof in silver and softened the sound of the wind like someone whispering the end of a long story. It melted before noon, but Malin watched it from the porch just the same, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, her hair wrapped in a scarf Shu had stitched with small, uneven stars. She sipped her tea slow, her fingers curled around the tin cup like it held something sacred. There was peace in her posture, but not complacency. She still moved like someone waiting for the next crack in the calm, and yet she didn't flinch anymore when strangers passed the trail, didn't shrink from thunder or smoke. The fear was still there, buried in muscle and memory, but it had no longer claimed her, it didn't own her. Inside, Thomas was sharpening a hatchet, not because he needed to, but because the rhythm of it grounded him. There had been too many days when his hands only knew how to carry grief, too many nights when sharpening tools was the only motion that made sense. Now, though, he paused every so often to listen. June's voice carried from the back room he was reading now, slowly but surely, each word a small victory. Malin had been teaching him with patience only a mother could have, even though she never once called herself that aloud. Shu had taken to drawing on scraps of sackcloth, pictures of the garden, the chickens, even a crooked version of Thomas, with a massive beard that made her giggle. They hung them on the walls like paintings in a church, and no one had the heart to take them down. Some mornings, Malin would wake early, knead dough before sunrise, and leave warm buns on the windowsill for the children. No one asked her to, no one had to. It was just something she did. And Thomas, once a man who hadn't spoken to another soul for months at a time, found himself speaking more each day, small things at first. Instructions about fence mending or where to plant squash. Then later, stories from before, of the town he'd left, the family he'd buried, the dog he once had that ran faster than the wind and couldn't be kept behind any fence. He didn't tell those stories for himself. He told them because Malin listened. One evening, as the sun stretched gold across the ridge and the smoke from the stovepipe curled like a prayer into the sky, Malin sat beside him on the porch. She'd just finished shelling peas. Her hands were greener than knuckles. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked at the hills, at the way the last light kissed the pines. Then he shook his head. "Not anymore." Malin nodded. "I used to dream of it, running until the land changed, until the faces did too, but now." "You dream different?" She smiled. "I sleep now." That was all she said, but it was everything. Later that month, they went into town together, the first time since the hearing. The stairs were fewer now, a nod here, a wave there. People remembered what they wanted, but they forgot just as quickly when survival was their priority. The world didn't have time to hold grudges forever. At the general store, Malin bought fabric and rice. Thomas picked up nails and a spool of fishing line. Jun chased Shu around the barrels of flour, both of them laughing too loud until the storekeep playfully shushed them. No one scolded them beyond that. No one asked where they were from. As they stepped outside, Thomas caught sight of an old man sitting near the edge of the boardwalk, his hat pulled low, a cane resting against his knee. Something about his posture made Thomas pause. The man looked up and smiled. "Thomas Greeley," he rasped. Thomas stiffened. "Do I know you?" The old man shook his head. "But I knew your brother. Rode with him once, long time ago." Thomas's expression changed slowly. "He's been dead 10 years. "I know. I buried him. Just wanted you to know, he talked about you, right before the end." Thomas swallowed. The old man touched the brim of his hat. "Said he hoped you'd find something worth staying for. Looks like you did." And then he stood and walked away without another word. Thomas didn't follow. He turned, saw Malin watching him from the wagon with the children climbing into the back. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just long memory showing up." They rode home in silence, but it was a full silence, like a cup brimming with more than words. Weeks passed, then months. Shu planted carrots and corn. Jun carved a little wooden horse for his sister's birthday. Malin started sewing clothes from the fabric they'd bought, and Thomas taught her how to shoot, though she still hated the sound of the gun. They hosted supper once a month for neighbors. Few came, but those who did left full. And every so often, a letter would arrive, addressed to no one, sealed with wax, unread, and placed at the bottom of a tin box buried beneath the hearth. They never talked about them, just kept them like markers in time. Then came the day the boy arrived. Not Jun. A different boy. He was maybe 16, half-starved, clothes torn. He stumbled into the yard at dusk, with his hand clutched over his side and blood staining his shirt. Thomas saw him first, grabbed the rifle, but Malin stepped in front of him. "No," she said, "not yet." She knelt beside the boy, peeled his hand away. The wound was bad, but not fatal. A knife, maybe, or a jagged rock. "What happened?" she asked. The boy's lips were cracked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They took my sister." Thomas moved forward. "Who did?" The boy passed out before he could answer. They worked through the night, stitching and cleaning. Shu brought clean water. Shun stood guard at the window, pretending to be brave. Malin didn't sleep. She sat by the boy until he stirred, until he opened his eyes and whispered again, "Help me." That was all it took. By morning, Thomas had saddled the horse. Malin packed food. They didn't talk about whether it was dangerous, whether they were risking what they'd built. The answer was yes, of course. But they remembered what it felt like to be the ones knocking, the ones begging, the ones who needed a stranger to care. So they rode. They followed the boy's directions past the ravine, into the woods, across the broken fence line of an old mining camp. The place had been abandoned for years, but now it bore new life in the worst way. A gang had holed up there, bandits, taking what they wanted from whoever passed too close. Malin found the girl in a cage, 11 years old, eyes wide with terror. Thomas cut the lock. The rest wasn't pretty, but it was clean, fast, final. They brought the children back with them, and didn't let them leave. Jun and Shu had new siblings now. The house grew louder, messier, fuller. The table had to be rebuilt longer. The garden doubled in size. The laughter tripled. Years passed. Thomas built another room. Malin grew tomatoes. They taught every child to cook, to read, to plant, to stand, not just survive, but become family. And one spring morning, when the snow was only a memory and the world smelled of damp earth and fresh bread, Malin looked around the cabinet, the shoes by the door, the pictures on the walls. The socks drying near the stove and said quietly, more to herself than anyone else, "I was told you needed a cook." Thomas looked up from where he was chopping wood. "No," he said, voice soft, "we needed a mother." She didn't answer. She just smiled. And that was the end of the beginning.